Yes. Talking of then, Scott, Tombstone had, of the four people in particular that I mentioned in the introduction, this had Bill Paxton, who I'm not hugely down on, but I had said in a couple of podcasts over the last couple of years that I really didn't rate him particularly much. He had these moments. Turns out, for the most part, Tombstone's one of them. I think he was definitely works better as a supporting actor. Quite like him in this, so I got away from this film quite happily. Mm-hmm. However, the next film has three people that, between the three of us, we have pilloried quite badly over the years. So, yeah, there's not a lot of hope coming into this for me for Wyatt Earp, but let's see. Did you find that proved to be false or true for yourself?
In a lot of ways, it's the least of its problems, actually. But it's Wyatt Earp, which was released 6 months after Tombstone, sees Kevin Costner step into the boots of the titular lawman after jumping ship from the production of Tombstone. It says here that he was looking for something more interested in the wider context of Earp's life, not just the headline events. So he and the production team moulded what was to be a 6-hour miniseries into this 3-hour wannabe epic to, well, spoilers, not brilliant results, this proving to be something of a box office bomb. Let's see if its financial failure is mirrored in its artistic side. Further spoilers, yes.
So I just can't believe that there was going to be twice as much of this when there isn't enough for this.
Exactly, yeah. At any rate, we're introduced to a young Earp, played by Ian Bohen, stopped from running off to join the war by his father, Gene Hackman, who reinforces the importance of family bonds. Before long, a slightly naive Earp is off west to make his fortune as a wagon driver before returning home to Missouri and settling down with Annabeth Gish's Urilla. Sadly, she's not long for this world, typhoid fever claiming her and their unborn child. This understandably starts a downward spiral of grief and drunkenness for Wyatt, soon finding himself an outlaw. He heads back out west, and after a stint as a buffalo hunter, he becomes a lawman in Kansas, hooking up with a prostitute, Mayor Winningham's Mattie Blaylock, who becomes his common-law wife as he builds a career. After a period of tootling about various western locales, we eventually reach Tombstone, where he relocates with his brothers and their wives, and after failing to set up a business, they return to bringing the law to the lawless, namely the Clanton Gang, doing all that OK Corral stuff, of which you will no doubt have heard. Now, the problems with Wyatt Earp don't end with casting Dennis Quaid as Doc Holliday. In fact, of said problems, that's perhaps the least of it. And before getting too negative...
Speak for yourself.
it should be noted on at least some levels there are things to appreciate here, particularly the production design, and with the exception of a few absolutely honking day-for-night shots, the cinematography, which is quite often beautiful. Sadly, they're saddled to such an overwhelmingly dull film, it is simply impossible to care. It seems that for large swathes of the film, they've sought to get an epic feel to things by giving it so much space to breathe between moments of drama that they've cut out the actual moments of drama, so it's less of a breath and more of an endless sigh. Strangely, given the life that the man led, the dullest part of it all is Costner's Earp. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have disagreed with Costner's position that there should be a film focused on Earp and his character, but, well, this ain't it, Chief. Watching this, without really knowing all that much about Earp, I'd figured that if Tombstone was leaning heavily into the legend of Earp, this must be pushing for a more realistic portrayal of the man and his life. And maybe that is why Costner is playing him with all the verve, charm and joie de vivre of a bag of cement, although it doesn't explain why, faced with choosing between the accepted reality of Earp's life and the actions and legends, Dan Gordon and Lawrence Kasdan just made up a bunch of new stuff, particularly early on. Normally, that invention alone would be enough to have me filing up the vitriol cannon. If you think a subject is interesting enough to warrant a biopic, you should not be embellishing it to this degree, but I would have offered it a pass based on the man straddling the line between legend and reality. At least I would have done if what he'd made up was actually interesting. It seems to at least to hew closer to reality after the first hour, albeit still leaning towards a sympathetic view of someone who was as often on the wrong side of law as he was enforcing it. But again, that somehow translate into him not being flawed and complex, but a complete blank slate. I think they were trying to portray someone left cold and somewhat heartless after the death of his first life, leading to his questionable treatment of Mattie Blaylock before being redeemed by his love for Joanna Going's Josie Marcus. But these relationships might as well have been Zoom calls for all the warmth and realism they show. Anyway, to cut this short, something the film very much also ought to have done, I think a slightly less charitable interpretation of Costner's issues with the direction of Tombstone was that he wanted more screen time. Mission achieved for Costner, but it's very much not to our benefit with this interpretation of the character. Some critics put this on their worst of 1994 lists, which is surely a touch hyperbolic, but that is not a hill I would choose to die on. Choose to watch Open Range again over this. Much better film in every regard.
I'm glad you mentioned Open Range, because I've now seen three Kevin Costner westerns that I can think of: Dances with Wolves, Wyatt Earp, and Open Range. And one of them is head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of those is a genuinely warm, touching, affecting film. With a really good central performance from Kevin Costner, with superb support from Robert Duvall. And the rest are garbage.
Yeah.
I have my particular beef with Dancing with Wolves, and that involves Goodfellas, which is not really the film's fault, but still, it's not very good. I just don't understand how or why this film is as boring as it is.
Yeah. It's very puzzling, given the events of Wyatt Earp's life, that you could make something this characterless and empty.
Yeah. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
There is not 3 hours of material in it. There's not 90 minutes of material in this film. And do I need to see 20 minutes of how Wyatt Earp was somebody who skinned buffaloes for a while? No. No. I could have done without that. That wasn't adding anything.
Not at all. It seems to be there purely to introduce two characters that you could have introduced by just saying hello. It's not required at all.
Apparently, both of those characters played by two of the people I mentioned earlier. One, Bill Pullman, who Craig particularly likes. The other, who I actually also thought it was Craig, but I realised now it was you, I believe, mentioning, I guess it was in Strange Days, you mentioned that was what your total of... oh no, perhaps it was Craig. I forget precisely. But we're talking about Strange Days. Sorry.
Yes, if it's Tom Sizemore, I don't like him at all. But
yes,
both him and Paxton, I'll get confused. Both of those characters have turned out to be so inconsequential. I didn't even bother to mention them in the recap, so I'll let that one slide.
No. Yeah, it's Bill Pullman, who Craig went out his way to avoid the wrong film for. And you with Tom Sizemore, I thought it was great, but no, when you talk about Strange Days bringing, I think your line was, that brings the total number of tolerable Tom Sizemore performances up to 1.
Yes.
I would add a second in that he's actually quite entertaining in the third season of Twin Peaks, but I know you've not seen that, so that's not going to help you any. But both of those characters, why are they there? What do they add? And when you talk about characters, well, there aren't any. As I said in my introduction, for some reason, Wyatt Earp is played here as an irredeemable prick. He has no charm. He's horribly misogynist. He's a thug. He's a killer. He's a criminal. There's no point through any of these 3 hours where I have anything other than contempt for Wyatt Earp. Now, it may be that that's closer to reality, but I guess this is not the film that's going to be showing that. But it's a really weird choice. And it's like Kevin Costner, I guess he's not the greatest actor, but he can be engaging.
Yeah.
Open Range, as we mentioned, The Untouchables, even a couple of things more recent, like his smaller role in Shadow Recruit. I can like Kevin Costner, but in this he's hateful.
Yeah.
But he's also the film's only character. Because, well, there's that man whose name I do not want to mention again. And then everybody else, I'm not joking, I genuinely had no idea who anybody was.
Yeah, I could
at least
not have
in terms
picked...
of the cowboy gang.
Yeah, and I would have struggled to... I couldn't have picked out of a lineup which one of Wyatt Earp's brothers is which. You know, I know some of the actors, of course, but in terms of which one was which, not even slightly close to it. They were all interchangeably people that Wyatt Earp talked to occasionally. That's
it, yeah. I think maybe, partly because the Tarantino connection, but I know Michael Madsen very well, so I think he was the one person who could, I'm fairly sure he's Virgil, but he's definitely not as intriguing or recognisable character as Sam Elliott's version of him. But everybody else, I generally, I have no idea who you are, and in particular, all of the villains, they were men with faces. there was no characterization. There was no way to recognise anybody. So if you don't even know who a single person is, why would you care about anything that happened?
Yeah,
and it's really the whole film is so flatly acted, and I think it's got to be Lawrence Kasdan's direction. He's not particularly known for being a director.
Yeah.
And I think it's the direction because it's so universally flat for everybody in the entire film.
even when events ought to have a bit more spin on things, it is all just an absolute wet blanket of a film.
Yeah.
Even when, let's say, I couldn't bring myself to hate Costner's turn, even when he's doing hateful things, because he just doesn't have enough character in it to really get that across. I can kind of understand the degree, as I was saying, why you would want to make a film about Earp himself and the other characters would kind of fade off to the background. But it turns out that's just dull. Certainly this interpretation of what they've done with Earp is dull. And that's the crucial thing of it. If you're going to make it about one character, you need to make that character interesting and vibrant in some way. And this one is just so flat all the way throughout. As I say, I think it is possibly completely intentional that he kind of died inside after his wife died, and that's why he's so kind of flat throughout the film. But it's a 3-hour film, and he's this borderline zombie presence for like 2/3, a bit more of it, before he kind of perks up a little bit at the end when he actually meets someone he loves again. And maybe you could, if you're charitable, think there's a little bit of life coming back to him at that point, towards the end. But for most of it, he's just an absolute non-entity of a character, and he's the only thing on the screen for so much of it that it makes it an absolute chore to get through. This film did feel like it was 6 hours long. It's just an absolute chore.
Yeah, it took me most of the day to watch it. I kept like stopping and just like to do other things for a bit because I needed to like build up the stamina again.
Yeah.
But it's not that you can't even say that like there's like a deliberate nature of him being flat, because everybody's flat.
True.
I think it really marked it off, and I think it must be a directing thing. Possibly the only person in the film, but there are a couple moments that the various wives get where they get to kind of scream a bit. Beyond that, every single person in the film is completely flat the entire time, apart from Gene Hackman, and you basically couldn't pay Gene Hackman to act badly.
Yeah,
he's not capable of it. Hammy, certainly he can do, and look at the Superman films, but you couldn't pay him to act badly. So the small bits of Gene Hackman is the one time anybody's actually acting beyond this weird monotone.
Yeah.
Also, it's got the strangest score as well. It's a lot of it's kind of like big kind of epic score that, I mean, it matches the landscapes, but absolutely not the action of the characters. But there are parts, including I think, like kind of, I guess it would be the title theme, that do not belong in this film at all. That sound like they're from a space epic. To the point where I checked to see whether this film had the same composer as Apollo 13. It doesn't. But in particular, that first thing, it felt like it was from a film like Apollo 13 or something. James Newton Howard did the score for this. But it absolutely did not fit. It's a weirdly disjointed film, and I mean, I guess there's quite an irony too in that this film came about because Kevin Costner disagreed with the direction of the original one. I assume he was going to be in the Kurt Russell role if that story is true.
Yeah.
And he was apparently trying to torpedo Tombstone.
Yes, at least Wikipedia tells me so, yes.
Yes, I didn't go any further than Wikipedia today, unfortunately. But because it's weird to think that Kevin Costner really did have clout in the mid-90s, and I don't understand where that came from, but I do know where it went. It went the way of Waterworld and The Postman.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's trying to torpedo the other film. It's like, where's the other film? Pretty good success. It's nonsense, but it's a really entertaining film, whereas Wyatt Earp is so dull and so leaden. I don't know how they screwed up so bad, because the idea of this mythic dime novel selling Western lawman, like, that should be exciting, and like they managed to take that character and make him miserable and make the whole film miserable.
Yeah.
I guess that's an achievement of sorts, but it's not one you particularly want to put on your CV.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's a misguided attempt to bring some kind of realism to a character that is so, entrenched in the legends, that this was kind of a reinterpretation of it, but it just doesn't make for a good film. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
what was the point?
It squanders so much of its cast as well. This, I know it sounds like I'm completely bagging on it. Actually, well, that's because I am, because there was, worst of 1994, almost certainly not. I'd agree with you there, Scott, but There's nothing for in this for to be recommended by me at all.
If I was alive, if I was reviewing films back in 1984 at this degree, and we had our kind of year-end lists, this would be on one of my most disappointing lists for sure, because the amount of talent that's involved in it behind and in front of the camera, and given the material you could have had to work with, to come up with this is an absolute disappointment. It is by no means, I don't have encyclopedic knowledge of what came out in 1994, but I'm almost certain there was much worse than this. But yeah, this would certainly be a huge disappointment, given the records of everyone going into this, and in most cases coming out of it, everyone involved has done much better before and after this, even Quaid. So this is an absolute disappointment on all those levels. Yeah,
I mean, like as I said, Gene Hackman comes out of this with the best results because, well, anything just washes off of him because he's way better than this film deserves.
Yeah.
He could have done this in his sleep and possibly did, for all I know. Everybody else seems to be asleep. He's just the one that didn't show it. But then you've got, while she's not even half the actress her mother was, but Isabella Rossellini is a kind of striking and interesting presence. She tends to stand out things like, well, I know she was in it. I know I saw her. I don't remember any of her scenes at all. I only saw it like 2 days ago.
Yeah. I didn't mention it, but when I was doing my notes for this, I watched this yesterday as I recorded it, and I already couldn't remember most of the events and what order they happened in the day after it. So, yeah, it just does not stick in the memory at all. There's nothing to grab onto in this film whatsoever.
Yeah. Weirdly, there is one thing I say I'll give it the edge over Tombstone is that, while it's a fairly small role, I found Mark Harmon a bit more engaging as Johnny Behan than John Tenney, although he didn't have the same natty clothes.
Yes.
but that may just have been luck. Because everything else is so bad. It's such a strange film that it should all be so flat and so uninteresting. Wyatt Earp was such a romantic character. The myth of the Old West, he's considered this, a very controversial figure, of course, but considered this legendary lawman and all the stories written about him. He was around in the early years of Hollywood. People kind of made films about him and I guess tapped him for experiences and stuff. Lots of early Hollywood stars were his funeral in 1929. And this is a film you make about him?
Yeah.
Miserable git who's not a good person, and he's miserable git for the whole film. Well done. And everybody else is a miserable git too. Great. And we get to see several hours of the odd jobs he did for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I could absolutely believe that was his proper character, and that is an entirely accurate representation of it, but I don't want to see it in a film if that is the case. So, exactly, in all regards, fail.
It's not like I said earlier. I could believe this is more accurate, but it's not interesting.
No, not in the slightest.
Even if it was accurate, there must be a way to make it interesting, surely.
Yes. Apply the same standards of truthiness you apply to everything else, and when you're making a film about someone's life, just make it up. Just no one would care. You've got an excuse here more than you do for anyone else because the man and the legend is so intertwined. But no, this is just boring, and no one wants to watch a boring film.
Yes. So yeah, I think we're agreed there, Scott. Then give a massive body swerve to Wyatt Earp, but you could definitely do worse and check out Tombstone because Tombstone's fun.
True. Absolutely.